Hello and welcome to episode number 25 of the Cheesesteaks and Controllers podcast, presented by Fox PHL The Gambler, 102.5 FM, 1480 AM, and iHeartRadio Philadelphia. 25 episodes, the Silver Cheesesteak. Here we are. My name is Jason Fanelli, and I am the Esports and Gaming Insider for Fox PHL The Gambler, and I am so excited for this week's episode, folks. I cannot keep myself contained. Two excellent interviews coming your way. One, the director of a documentary that just released. Another, one of the top voices in games media today. Both of them have a lot of great things to say. They're both great interviews, and I am so excited for you to listen to them. But first, let's stick with what we do here and get into the 6 in 60 seconds. League of Legends North American legend Doublelift has announced his retirement from competitive play, joining his longtime partner Bjornsson in retirement. No word yet on what Doublelift is doing with his new free time. A Mortal Kombat 11 Pro Competition Season 2 has been announced and will be hosted by PlayStation as part of their PlayStation Competition Centers format. Two-time Overwatch League champion Matthew Super Delissi has re-signed with the San Francisco Shock for the 2021 season in pursuit of a third straight title. Elsewhere, Fall Guys developer Mediatonic has announced that their game has sold 11 million copies on PC, and Season 3 will be shown off during the Game Awards next week. Elsewhere, Fortnite's Chapter 2 Season 4 ends with 13.5 million concurrent players fighting Marvel's Galactus, and Season 5 began with a playable Mandalorian and Baby Yoda companion. And finally, players sue EA Sports, alleging that FIFA 21's difficulty is deliberately inflated in order to drive pack sales for FIFA's Ultimate Team. That is your 6 in 60 seconds. There it is, folks. That is your 6 in 60 seconds for the week on this episode number 25 of our crazy podcast. I still can't get over that I've done this 25 times already since the summer. Big milestones require big guests, however, and we have one coming up in the second half, but we also have one right here and now. Insert Coin, a fantastic new documentary chronicling one of the biggest game companies of the 90s, has released. Watched it on Tuesday night this week and really enjoyed it. And here to talk about his work is the director and industry veteran himself. That's Josh Tsui. Josh, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jason.
Happy to have you. Very much liked your documentary. Like I said, I watched it a couple nights ago, and it was really took me back to the days of my youth in the arcades. Now, I personally wasn't so much a Mortal Kombat fan because I wasn't allowed to be. I was 7 or 8 years old. I'm watching these interviews with the parents that are happening on the news that you've included, and I'm like, yep, that would have been my mom if we were in that arcade. That's what my mom would have said. So that was put a real big smile on my face. But before we get into the actual documentary, give me your background on Midway. I know that you worked there for a time, starting in 1993, if my research is correct. So tell me what you did with Midway and when you started.
Yeah, so I started in 93 as what they used to call back then a video artist, which basically was meaningless. It meant that I came in, worked with a very small team, on a game called WrestleMania, the arcade game. That was the first
Yeah.
game I worked
Oh,
on.
what a classic.
Yeah. And
Oh, man.
I came in and and I did everything from digitizing the characters to become sprites in the game to touching up, props, making environment art. Back then it was only 5 or 6 people on the team, so
Wow.
everybody counted. Yeah, exactly. And so we did everything, and it was a great learning experience because I came in with a certain set of skills, coming from my filmmaking days, in film school. But I came in and ended up having to learn so much because of it, and it was hugely rewarding. So yeah, I worked at Midway, all through the '90s, which is what the film covers, and that it was amazing to work with the NBA Jam team, the Mortal Kombat team, and a bunch of incredible characters.
So you're talking about the different teams inside Midway, and a big focus in part of this documentary is how there was a bit of a competition or a division between
Yeah,
these teams. The one story that sticks out to me is when the one guy, his name eludes me unfortunately at the moment, but he's on the War Gods team, and he
yeah,
goes just near the Mortal Kombat team, and they shut the door in his face.
yeah,
That is
exactly.
that's pretty brutal. Were you subject to any of that while you were at Midway?
Yeah, I was not, but I was definitely a witness to it. And it's interesting, in that story, it was George Petro talking
That's what
about
it
his
was. Yep, there it
involvement.
is.
Yeah, his involvement with War Gods, and that was a case that was an example of how the competitive nature of the studio started to get a bit ugly once success really hit the company. Early on, when they were first starting off, with games like Narc and Smash TV, and the company was growing, there was always a rivalry. People wanted to make a better game than their peers. It was just a good-natured competition. But once money came into the picture, when you have mega successes like Mortal Kombat and NBA Jam, and you have suddenly designers that are making, $1 million plus on royalties, people started kind of, side-eyeing each other. And so War Gods was the ultimate example of that. And, here is a company that had a bunch of people making games with almost no management. And with no management, that also means that people were deciding, what, even though Mortal Kombat is a fighting game that's made in the studio, I want to make a fighting game to make that type of money, and I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And, management didn't necessarily tell them not to do it. And so it ends up getting super ugly because of that.
Well, would you say that management almost kickstarted this competition? It certainly seemed that way.
Yeah.
Like they were kind of poking the bear to put these teams uh, against each other, so that I guess they were thinking that a rising tide, or the rising tide raises all boats. So if everybody feels super competitive, both teams will create instant classics. Didn't really turn out that way, did it?
Yeah, so that's the thing, is that it was a great idea in the beginning, but it eventually, that type of feeling towards each other, that type of competition, if it's not reined in properly, can get completely out of control.
Sure.
And earlier in the film, there's the example of how Midway had a large rivalry against Badley.
Bally.
So this is back when Midway was still called Williams. So Williams and Badley were arch rivals to each other in Chicago. They were literally across the street from each other at a certain point.
Wow.
And so it was funny because there was this big rivalry between the companies, and then when Williams ended up buying Bally and turned themselves into one company, now the rivalry was all within the studio itself. There was nobody else to compete against, and so that ugliness across companies now becomes internal. And yeah, the management early on really fostered that type of relationship. They this, you got to remember, this is early '90s in Chicago. The CEO was a fairly hard-nosed businessman from New York, and that was just the way business was done.
Yeah, I can imagine that it made for some very interesting days in the workplace. And I mean, the games spoke for themselves. NBA Jam, Mortal Kombat, all-time classics. The Grid, not so much. But but I'm really fascinated in how that division, that invisible wall, was able to fester and ultimately cost, I would think, in the long run, the company a lot. The Aerosmith stories are interesting too. How that didn't exactly pan out the way they wanted it to because it just didn't compare to Terminator 2.
Yeah.
I love the little anecdotes in this documentary. One that actually sticks out to me a little further back is when the one animator refused to light the rim. Was it Sal DeVita? Refused to light the rim on fire at NBA Jam. So he forced Mark Turmel to use the explosions from Smash TV. That's
Yep.
hysterical. Are there any other stories like that, maybe little anecdotes, little funny things like that, that did not make it into your movie?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of them, and that story about Mark and Sal with the on fire mode, it's a great example of how the games were designed. It was just basically they were making up as they went along, and if somebody didn't like it, there'd be a huge argument, and then somebody would just sneak something in. It was just everything was, very few things were written down. It was just like, hey, this seems cool, and then there'd be a big argument, and somebody eventually sneaks it in anyways. But one of my favorite stories that didn't get into the movie was it's a story from Revolution X, and you know, it, boy, how do I put this? This is going to come out really strange, but back then, there were very few, um, Asians in the development team. In fact, there were very few non-white people in the development team, and so anytime they needed let's say an Asian face, it ended
Oh
up
no.
being me. It ended up being me, and so that's how like I end up in being in the Mortal Kombat games as a face and everything. But there was one time that for Revolution X they were creating what they called the boss character of the game. It's the end of the game. This is the villain you need to defeat to end the storyline. And so so they decided the evil boss person was, in its human form was going to be a Japanese businessman. And then once you defeat him, that Japanese businessman morphs into this monster that you have to destroy. So of course they asked me to be the character for the Japanese businessman. And so they put me up in some just ridiculous outfit where I just looked like a very like stereotypical, bad, Asian looking person, just
Oh
looked super
no.
nerdy. Yeah, it was one of those things where, it just like in the wrong hands, it can come out very badly. And in this case, it was not going to come out well. So they shot video of me, and during this whole production, I'm thinking to myself like this could turn out really badly for me, But I had just started at the company, and so at the time I just felt like, oh God, maybe I should just go along with it. So anyway, so they shoot this video of me, and I'm doing all these crazy things, and then they got me in the game, and it was just the worst stereotypical tropes that you can think of with that type of
Oh
character. And
goodness.
so it was in the game for a long time before it got released. They were working on everything, and I saw myself in the game, and it just was not coming out well. And so, so what ended up happening was I was trying to figure out a way to tell my bosses that, hey, you know what, this is not a good idea. And so that Christmas season, I sent the lead designer a Christmas card, and on it it said, Merry Christmas, and also thank you for shaming my family. And
Oh
so,
no.
and so you got the card, looked at it, and then you realize, oh, maybe we should look at this again. And so they saw what my point on it, and they ended up taking it out and changing the ending of the game.
That's good. That sounds like the culturally insensitive version of the Mark Lafredo story with him being
Yes,
the final boss in Narc. Very
exactly.
similar, but way different endings.
Exactly. And it's just an example of, I mean, there was no malice intended or anything, but it's just one of those things where people's ideas get out of their own control because, everyone's making it up as they go along.
Sure.
So it's not until you sit back and look at it in context and realize, oh, this probably wasn't a good idea.
Yeah, I get. Oh man, just thinking about that now, I can only imagine what the backlash would have been.
Yeah.
Assuming anybody got there, Revolution X is notorious for being very difficult. Uh, but oh boy, that's a bit of a crisis averted. In fact, that actually brings me to another question. That anecdote right there, you yourself would have made an excellent interview subject. You were with the company throughout most of, if not all, of the time that you chronicled.
Yeah.
But and yet you didn't actually appear on camera yourself. What was the decision? What went into the decision of you sitting out?
Yeah, there were a couple of reasons for that. One is that the people that are profiled in the documentary, I consider them to be titans of the industry. Like they were huge back then,
Sure.
and many of them have gone on to even bigger things now. And so I just, I was not about to put myself at that same level to feature myself in a film that I'm making, about these people and put myself in there because then it's like there's, it just makes people assume, oh, Josh thinks that he's just as big as these guys are. And so I wanted to avoid that as much as possible. Now, with that said, in the spirit of Midway, I put myself in the game as an Easter egg throughout the film, just because I'm a character in so many of these films. So in a lot of the gameplay footage, you'll actually see me
Oh,
inside of
really?
it. So yeah, so that's my little Hitchcock cameo,
Oh,
that I
I did
did.
see. I think you appeared as Sub-Zero a couple of times. I think, if
Yep,
I remember
yeah,
correctly.
yeah,
That's interesting. I'll have to go back and check that out. I
yeah.
haven't.
So
I plan on showing this to people, so I imagine I'll be watching it again.
I,
Um, oh, it's
so that was the first, that was the first reason, and then the second one was really, this is my first time making, a film, and a documentary, and so I didn't want it to come off looking like a vanity project.
sure.
I really want it. I really wanted to be taken seriously as a filmmaker, and I felt that if I put myself in the film, then it just my opinion on that was it'll it'll end up kind of marginalizing the film, the quality of the film itself, just because again I didn't want it to come off as something just about myself. So those are the two main reasons.
That's very fair. I can see the impulse for a potential a filmmaker who's not quite as humble to put their face all over it. So for you to pull back on that takes a lot of restraint, especially when you can lend so much of your firsthand experience to the subject matter. So I get that. It's a very honorable position to take.
Thanks.
Taking some of that honor back from when Revolution X almost stole it from you.
Exactly.
uh, so my next question, speaking of absent people in this doc, a notably absent name and a noticeably absent name is Ed Boon. He's
Yeah.
referenced all over it, but he never actually appears. I am assuming, hopefully correctly, that you did try to reach out to him on this. If you did, what happened that he couldn't be a part of it, if you're allowed to talk about it? And if not, how come?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely reached out to Ed multiple times, and we've actually talked quite often, during the production of the film. And there was no any one reason why he can be in the film, and I respect Ed a lot, just like I respect everybody who's in the film. And so, he basically for reasons of his own could not be in the film. He still works on the Mortal Kombat
True.
franchise. He works for Warner Brothers on this, and so I understand the sensitivities of that. And so, with that said, though, many of the segments that he's shown in the film, he's seen them, and and I made a point of making sure that he got represented properly, whether through archival footage or audio interviews and such. And so it was definitely a challenge to work around that. But I feel like I got, I know Ed, and so I feel like I got his personality in the film, correctly, even without him being present in it.
Yeah, I definitely did. I feel like he was when you started talking about Mortal Kombat and getting after that, he was all over it. So he definitely,
Yeah,
like I said, had a presence there. But it just felt a little strange that he wasn't actually in
sure.
it. But that makes sense. He is still part of the Mortal Kombat franchise, adding every '80s action star that he ever loved into his current game. So and he can keep doing it as far as I'm concerned. It's Rambo is really cool. I don't know if you've tried him yet, but
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah,
not to
no,
get
the types like it's funny. It's like somebody on Twitter had said, Mortal Kombat is is like the Super Smash Brothers for dads, and it's like
perfect.
I don't know if they meant that as an insult, but for me, it's like, yeah, that's awesome.
It,
I'll
it,
take
it,
that.
it's a perfect analogy between the last two games. First the horror dads, and now the action dads. Maybe next time we'll get the real dramatic dads,
Exactly,
like a Robert
exactly.
De Niro character or something. um, were there any other names that you reached out to for this piece that you couldn't work out? Were there any other big names that sat this one out?
Yeah, not, I mean, I was actually shocked that I was able to get who I got. Like, it was almost everybody I asked to be in the film were more than happy to participate. The only person that was a very polite no was Shaquille O'Neal, and
Oh,
and it was interesting because I was talking with his agent about it, and he had just finished talking to an author who was writing a book about NBA Jam, and so he had just finished doing that, and then so me following up with my film, they were very, they loved the idea, but they politely said no. And my theory on that is he's probably talked about NBA Jam so many times now. By the time I got to it, he's like, hey, I don't want my career to be about talking about NBA Jam at this point.
that's fair. Like he was tapped out. He had
Yeah,
enough.
exactly.
He'd been jammed out. So yeah, that makes sense, and that's a shame. His insight would have been cool. My last question then to you is, even though this documentary obviously focuses on Williams, on Midway, and then Williams and Bally and that particular company, the name Insert Coin is rather generic. Could you see yourself potentially trying or making this into a documentary series where you talk to other titans of the arcades at the time, your Capcoms, your Data Easts, your Taitos, and something like that, and maybe making more films in this format?
Yeah, it definitely was. It definitely played into that thinking. The main thing was that, yeah, if I called it, the story of Midway or something like that, I think a lot of people, I think that would play that type of titling would only play to a very specific audience, and so
Sure.
by doing insert coin, everyone knows what that means, and everyone knows about arcades. So I felt like it was more, it was a great way to bring people in, in a more broad sense.
I agree.
But with that said, I mean, the second part of that is like, yeah, if I have a title like that, it keeps me open to other subject matters, whether it's companies or eras of games or very specific people. It can kind of live on with that as the main title. So yeah, it was definitely something that I thought about fairly early on.
Well, I am looking forward to any future Insert Coins because your first foray was excellent. Josh Tsui, I really appreciate your time coming onto the podcast today. It was wonderful talking to you. Good luck to you and everything that you do in the future, and I am looking forward to whatever that may be. Josh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, there he is, Josh Tsui, director of Insert Coin, a fantastic documentary on one of the biggest arcade companies of the 90s. You can find that documentary at insertcoindoc.com. I highly, highly recommend you check it out. I believe it's $10 to rent for 24 hours or $15 to own, but it's certainly one I would absolutely recommend. That thing, it's a great look into what game development was like back in the day. Insertcoindoc.com is where you can find it, or Alamo On Demand is the actual service where you will rent it from. And yes, it is $9.99 to rent and $15.99 to purchase forever. It's an hour, 42 minutes of history with some names from the games and some names that you might recognize as well. Paul Anderson, who directed the Mortal Kombat movie, is in it. Ernest Cline, who wrote Ready Player One, is in it. Andrea Rene, who we will be speaking to shortly, is in it. Just a very good documentary that I highly recommend you check out when you can. But moving on from that, now it is time to talk about the best of what's coming in the next week. Take out your glasses. I hope you're thirsty. It's time for What's on Tap. Cyberpunk 2077 is on tap this week. I don't really have to say much more than that. First announced in 2012, CD Projekt Red's next major epic RPG is finally hitting our consoles on December the 10th. Also, Dragon Quest XI Definitive Edition makes its way from the Switch to the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light crosses the Pacific Ocean for the first time, coming to America on the Switch. And finally, the Madden NFL 21 and FIFA 21 next generation upgrades for Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 are now live, and you can enjoy them on your brand new consoles. That is what is on tap this week. A lot to fill your glasses, one gigantic one. So what's on tap for you? Yes, folks, that is what is on tap for the week. Cyberpunk is what's on tap for the week. That's basically it. After many, many delays and many, many months and years of waiting, 9 years, or 8 years, if my memory serves, we are finally in Cyberpunk week. But FIFA and Madden getting their next-gen upgrades, Fire Emblem 1 finally making it across the pond, and Dragon Quest 11 making it to PS4, or Definitive Edition making it to PS4 and Xbox One. Other things to play, but Cyberpunk is the real thing here. Let's not kid ourselves. Anyway, moving on to our second major interview of the episode. 25 episodes of this show, and I am embarrassed to say that I have yet to have a female voice. But who better to break that small glass ceiling around this show than one of the best voices in gaming, period, man or woman. You have seen her on Facebook. You have seen her in GameStop TV. You saw her back in Mahalo if you're an old fart like me. Her name is Andrea Rene, and I am honored to be speaking to her today. Andrea, how are you?
I'm great. I can't believe that you haven't had any other ladies on the show. What the heck,
it's
man?
It's embarrassing. I mean, I've pitched people, they've pitched me, but this is the first one, and it's a long time. It took too long, to be honest. It took too long.
Well, I'm happy to be your first. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate that. Now let's talk about Mahalo and where you started back in the 2009 or 2010 did you start?
I actually started at a really tiny little site called thebitbag.com. My first E3 was in 2008. Mahalo was my first kind of full-time video games job. I was working at its sister site called thisweekend.com. I started hosting this show called This Week in Video Games, which then led me to hosting Mahalo Video Games Today. And it's crazy you bring up Mahalo because I bet the vast majority of people listening to the show have no idea what Mahalo is.
Nope.
But they were a channel that really was part of the pioneering movement of walkthrough videos on YouTube back in the early days before the golden age of YouTube happened. And now, of course, walkthroughs are kind of the bread and butter of video game VODs on YouTube, which is kind of wild to think about.
That is true. Mahalo's Let's Plays or walkthroughs were a big part of that channel's success. And you're right. I don't remember any other channels really taking that step back in the beginning before gaming YouTube really hit its apex in the age of Minecraft and other things like that. But since then, since those beginning days, like I said, you have been very prolific. You've been everywhere. Facebook gaming, you did some things for E3. GameStop TV, you were on every month for about a year, correct?
Almost 3 years, actually.
Oh, wow, it was that long.
Yeah, IGN, I've done GameSpot. I've worked with people like Square Enix, Warner Brothers, EA Play. I hosted the Nintendo World Championships.
Oh, I forgot about that.
I mean, that was a pretty big moment for you to forget about.
Man, I'm sorry. I watched that whole thing. I'm the Smash Brothers fan that I am. I can't believe of all the things I forgot.
It was a really long broadcast, too, and we had to improvise almost the whole thing because, it was a live competition.
Yeah.
And I had the best co-host any on-camera person could ever ask for. Jordan Kent was just phenomenal. He was the lead caster for Nintendo, along with some wonderful people from Nintendo Treehouse and people also like Ashley Esqueda. So it was a great experience. But yeah, I like to kind of colloquially say that I've worked with everybody in the video games business.
And it's not a lie. It's 100% true. So,
well, I mean, almost.
Almost.
Put a little asterisk, be like, almost everybody.
Almost everybody. But, once this pandemic's over, I think you'll check those boxes pretty quick. What would you say, then, was your breakthrough job? Like the one where you thought, okay, this is where the tide turns. This is where I think I'm going to take it to the next level.
I don't think I've ever had that moment because as somebody who's been working in Hollywood and on camera for, about 15 years now, I think we as entertainers know that you're only as popular as your last job. True. And there isn't really one tide-turning moment in your career because, you're only as relevant as people remember you for. And I think if you look at any big performer, whether they're musicians or actors or what have you, they probably feel the same. You can't ever rest on your laurels when you're an entertainer. And most entertainers don't want to, right? Like they want to keep working, they want to keep pushing, they want to keep doing cool things. And I always kind of look at my career as what's the next cool thing that I get to do not look how far I've come, even though sometimes it's important to step back and acknowledge your accomplishments, because I think a lot of us, particularly in this era, suffer from imposter syndrome and the idea that I'm not good enough and what am I doing here? And someone's going to find out that I'm a fake when in reality you're not.
You could have just called me out there, Andrea. But like, think about when you were a kid growing up playing games. You just mentioned all those companies you worked with so far in your career. Would you have imagined in your wildest dreams that you could go back in time to tell that little Andrea, you're going to work with Nintendo when you get older?
No, never. Because when I was a kid, that wasn't an option, right? Like, I grew up, I'm a child of the 80s, and so I grew up in the NES era, and that was before digital video and the internet existed.
That's
and
right.
So the idea of, doing what I do today just was not a thought, because I didn't think it was possible. And also, like, video game media really hadn't begun yet. I mean, there was some print things that were happening, magazines, of course, and then they rose in the 90s and obviously proliferated in the 2000s and beyond. But when I was a kid, I wanted to be an actor, and I have no desires to be an actor now. I do some sketch comedy stuff with friends for funsies, but like, I have no desires to go into acting. But when I was 5 years old, I asked my mom for an agent because I wanted to be a performer so bad. She told that story at my wedding, and I was like, Mom, do you really need to embarrass me in front of everybody? Yeah. I'm from Fargo, North Dakota. I love my home state. I love my hometown, but not exactly known for its robust entertainment industry.
I would say not. One movie is probably as far as that goes.
No, my mom was like, sweetie, you can't have an agent. I'm sorry. There are no agents here. Eventually, my path would bring me to Los Angeles, where there are many.
Yeah, and honestly, looking back, it just seemed inevitable, because your ability on camera and your knowledge is inspiring, to be frank. It's one of those like bar setting, like that's the person you want to get to as far as how and what you've done and how you do it. But as you said earlier, you're only as popular as your last job. So in order to kind of relay that, you've now created your own entity in What's Good Games. Started in 2017 and has been a top name in games media since. What went into back in take me back 3 years ago when you were first drawing this thing up. What was the reason for it and the inspiration behind it, and how did you get from there to where you are now?
Wow, that's a big question. How much time do you have?
Honestly, as much as you want, but my program director is shuddering wherever he is right now, so whatever you need.
I'll try to be succinct. So I used to work full-time as a producer in a couple of different large digital media companies, and I really loved that team building and being able to bounce ideas off of people and really having a consistent place to go to talk about games and to make content every week. But at the time, I was working as a freelance contractor, doing gig work with clients and really enjoying myself and having a great time and getting to do some really exciting things. Like I mentioned, some of the clients that I've worked with. But I was missing that place to go every single week. I missed having like a show that I could be a part of all the time.
Sure,
instead of just waiting for guest appearances to come up, or, conferences to happen, or, a game summit, whatever the event was. I loved doing those, but I wanted something regular. So I was like, maybe I should start my own show. And I knew from working in digital media as long as I have that it was a massive undertaking. Building a brand from scratch is really, really hard and takes a lot of work and a lot of perseverance. And I was just not looking forward to doing it on my own. So I was like, I need to get some friends involved if I'm going to make this thing work. And at the time, I lived really close and I was spending a lot of time with my good friend, Alexa Ray Correa, who was working with Elation and Crunchyroll at the time. And she was getting ready to exit that position to move on to some other things. And I had said to her, I go, would you be interested in starting this venture with me? And she's like, that sounds really cool. That sounds fun. It sounds like something I would like to do. And I was like, awesome. Great. Now what? And then we're like, well, we Yeah, exactly. I was like, well, we can't just do it with the two of us. It probably would be better if we get some extra voices. And we knew Brittany Brombacher has a history of working in the podcasting space. She had her own podcast and kind of came up through the IGN blogs and then launched her own site called blondenerd.com. I was like, she's got an entrepreneurial spirit, and I really love her energy and her vibe. So we reached out to Brittany and asked if she would be interested in working with us. And she said, this sounds really cool. Have you talked to Christine Steimer? Now, Christine and I were friends, but I had never talked to her about making content together because I knew that she was making her own content on her own Twitch channel and was kind of doing her own thing. And I didn't know if she wanted to, leave that or take time away from that to work on a group thing.
Sure,
so I hadn't even contemplated asking her. And Britt and Steimer had been friends for a really long time. And so we asked her, and Steimer was like, oh my God, thank you for asking. I've been waiting to do something with a group. I hate being a solo content creator. And so it was kind of like serendipitous that we all got together when we did. And so I hosted what we fondly call WGG Con at my house back when I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area, where everybody came to stay with me for a weekend. And we just did some test shoots. We kind of spitballed a bunch of ideas of what the show would look like. We're like, how are we going to make money with this thing first and foremost? Like, in order for us to be able to devote time for it, we need to figure out how to monetize content, which is really the number one problem for any content creator is like, if this isn't going to just be like a passion project or a hobby, like how do I make money? Mm-hmm. And so we decided to launch a Patreon and just see how it went, because at the time we'd seen some men put together groups and podcasts and be pretty successful in the gaming space. And so we were like, let's do it. Even if it's only our moms who are subscribing and we're only making like $100 a month, at least we can do a podcast once a week and see how it goes. And so we put together some stretch goals, on a pipe dream, thinking maybe, we'll get some people interested. And we were blown away by how many people supported us out the gate. We blew past our goals within the first 24 hours, and What's Good Games was born.
Oh, it was long overdue, to be completely honest with you, to have an all-female voice entity in gaming. 100% long overdue. So when that came out, that's one of those things where I'm looking at it like, A, why didn't this happen before? And then I immediately think to myself, no, it couldn't have. It has to be now with these people because they are perfect for it. And after 3 years of great success, being all over the industry, being on top of things, 2020 kind of threw you a curveball, huh?
I think it threw everybody
a nice big curveball. That's true. So while the games have been very good, I imagine content creation has been tough, having to deal with all of the parameters around the pandemic. You have to stay away from one another. You have to record in separate video feeds. When you watch your YouTube channel, you see you're in your house and Brittany's in her house, so on and so forth. How have you adapted to this pandemic? And what do you think really helped you get through what has been a trying time?
2020 for content creators has been a whirlwind. Obviously, as I mentioned, it's been tough for everybody across the board for a wide variety of reasons. But I think what's been challenging about content creators is that we have kind of been sucked into an over-productivity wormhole, whatever you want to call it.
Workhole works. I like that.
Workhole.
A
it's
workhole.
a new term. I just made it, everybody. It was challenging for us to try to pivot. I mean, I think I had a pretty existential crisis back in March when we learned that E3 was going to be canceled.
Yeah, that was a tough day.
As a contractor who does a lot of hosting work for clients at E3, and it's my biggest week of the year, I usually work for at least 3 or 4 clients that week. I was just devastated to know that I was going to not only miss one of my favorite weeks of the year, not only as a gaming fan, but as a performer who loves working. But I also was like, what am I going to do with my business, my production company, without all of that client work? And I was like, how am I going to offset this? And then on top of that, for the podcast, for What's Good Games, people were no longer commuting to work because everybody was working from home, and podcast numbers took a giant hit. Almost everybody I know took a 15 to 30% drop right off the gate in numbers, because a lot of us who make content in podcasts specifically rely on people who are driving to and from work or taking
Yeah.
the train or however they commute and listening to our shows on their commute. And they weren't doing that. They weren't listening at home in the same way that they used to when they were commuting. And that was tough for us to try to combat and figure out, like, well, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to, pivot our business to offset that? Can we grow our business? What do we do? And so I got together with Brittany, who is my partner who runs the business with me. And we were like, what should we do now that we're stuck at home? Because a lot of our content is also based around these events that we travel to, whether they're preview events for video games, studio visits to visit video game developers, or conferences like E3, like the Game Developers Conference, Comic-Con, etc. We said, well, I guess we got to start streaming.
Yep.
And so we decided to do a second episode of the podcast called What's Good Games Live. That was a shorter version of the show where we didn't talk about hands-on impressions of games. We just focused on news and headlines from the weekend, because the way we record our show and publish on Fridays, if something breaks on a late Thursday through the weekend, we usually miss it, because then it's old news by the time we get to the episode the next week. And so we're like, oh, we think a Monday show would be great. And it was really successful. We had a lot of people that joined us live and really loved it. And we're not sure if we're going to continue it into 2021.
Sure.
Because I think we both have other projects that we're looking at. But, I mean, just pivoting to try to make more content was what we decided to do. But in hindsight, it's like, man, that was a choice. That was a choice to, like, put all of that extra pressure on ourselves when we're already under so much stress because of everything happening with the pandemic.
Yeah, but it's that fight or flight. You know what I mean? Are you just going to sit there and wallow in the fact that all these jobs are lost? Or are you going to try and, keep on keeping on? And you certainly kept on keeping on it, which is awesome. I really dig the live, the What's Good Games Live. I like being able to just pop on to Twitch and see what you guys are up to and what you're talking about. I also like your you started streaming more gameplay.
Yeah, so I had never really done that before. It's not something that I ever was passionate about, and any content creator who does live streaming, whether it's on Twitch or YouTube or Facebook Gaming, wherever they stream, will tell you that you have to do it a lot and you have to do it consistently. And that was just not something I could commit to with my travel schedule. I was traveling, multiple times a month. I mean, I was at the airport almost every week for a while, and
that's brutal.
It's brutal, but I loved it. I love traveling to do jobs, and I love my work. And it's been really hard to be grounded. I haven't been at home this much in the last 12 years.
Wow.
It's really wild to think about how long it's been since I've been inside of an airport.
Your husband's probably like, who are you? Why have you been? Why are you here this much? Get out of here.
It's the same for him. He's a big work traveler as well. And fortunately, we get to travel to a lot of these events together because he also works in video games. But so for me, playing games on Twitch has been an interesting experience. I've actually found that I quite enjoy it most of the time. I do find that I struggle with the commitment part. Like, there are days when I have a stream scheduled when mentally I'm like, I just don't have it in me to give. Because when you're streaming gameplay, you have to be constantly on. You have to have a stream of consciousness. You have to be talking out loud constantly. And it's something that takes practice, and it's something that you have to learn to do if you're not a natural improviser. And just being passionate about games is not enough to make engaging content on Twitch. And you have to really learn skills unique to gameplay live streaming to make the most of it and make it engaging and make people want to stick around and watch you.
No,
there's just so much choice,
It's
like,
definitely
so many
true.
People.
It's so hard. Well, yeah, not only that, not only is there so many people doing it that you have all the choices in the world, but when you do sign on and stream for a while, you're basically like entertaining, like if you were having company over, but you're entertaining the entire internet. So you have to keep the energy up, keep things light and fun. You can't, depending on what kind of channel you have, you can't swear or anything like that, depending on what you're playing. There are things that people don't even consider when they're talking about getting into streaming or being a YouTube live person or something like that. And it is tough, and I admire that your pivot to that. Now, whether you keep doing that when things start to clear up, obviously it would make sense if you didn't. But if you did, I'm sure people would enjoy that as well. But let's talk about one last thing before I get you out of here. The Game Awards is next week. Big event in the gaming industry. Again, not something that we can attend, but we can watch it. Jeff Keighley and the gang doing their thing. Video games in general have been the rare bright spot in 2020. I think you'd agree with that, yes?
Absolutely.
So tell me, with the end of the year coming up and the awards next week, so first, what do you think is going to take Game of the Year next week? Not what you want, unless they're the same, but what would you predict?
They're definitely not the same.
Definitely not the same. Good.
I do want to make a disclaimer that What's Good Games is a voting jury member of the Game Awards. We are really excited to be part of that jury and have loved working with Jeff Keighley, the executive producer of the awards, for the past 3 years. 4 years now, I believe it is. And the nominees this year for Game of the Year, I mean, Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost of Tsushima, Hades, Animal Crossing, New Horizons, and then Last of Us Part 2. What an amazing cross-section of video games.
Crazy. It's hard to believe how varied these games are in the Game of the Year category specifically, and also how tough it is to pick from them.
Yes. Well, I mean, listen, I am a diehard Animal Crossing fan. I never played Animal Crossing before New Horizons, but I now have 650 hours of Animal Crossing.
Goodness.
So I love Animal Crossing, but I don't think that it has any business being in the Game of the Year contention, quite frankly.
Now, see, I disagree with you there, because when I look back at 2020, 5 years from now, I'm going to think of that game, because it is the game that represents the pandemic to me.
But that I don't disagree with you, but the qualifier says recognizing a game that delivers the absolute best experience across all creative and technical fields.
That's fair. That is fair. So if we're talking about it in the same aspect as Best Picture and the Oscars, then yes, I agree with you.
Yes, I mean that's essential. I mean, the Game Awards obviously aren't the Academy's awards. That's DICE, the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences.
This is more
those
the MTV
awards
Video
will happen next year. But I mean, for me, the for sure winner here is The Last of Us Part 2. Naughty Dog is always a critical favorite. They usually sweep whatever award categories they are in. I think Hades is a dark horse to potentially win. It was critically favored, and a lot of the outlets that are judging and part of the jury probably will vote for Hades. I think that in the beginning of the year, I thought Final Fantasy VII Remake was a layup. I thought that for sure this game is going to win. I have never finished a Final Fantasy game, and I loved Final Fantasy VII Remake. I thought it was amazingly well done. And obviously, Ghost of Tsushima did some things that were really excellent as well. I think Doom is in a class all of its own when it comes to first-person shooter combat, but it's just too much of a mature rated game with a very dark, violent theme, I think, to ever win Game of the Year. But that's why I just think that there's just no way that The Last of Us Part 2 doesn't win.
Now, see, I think that is a solid argument, but I also think that it falls into a trap that two games from previous years have fallen into, those being Red Dead Redemption 2 and Death Stranding. Both of those games won all of the technical awards in their years. Death Stranding last year, Red Dead 2 years ago. But Game of the Year in 2018 was God of War, and in 2019 was Sekiro. So I'm thinking that Last of Us Part 2 might fall in that category as well, where it sweeps all the technical stuff, but then when it comes to the big one, Hades or Ghost of Tsushima was what I voted for, would overtake it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting how that works, because I always try to remind our voting members when we're nominating to look at who you're picking in the other categories and then go back to Game of the Year and go, they should align. The games that you pick for the majority of the other technical and creative awards should be the game that wins Game of the Year. That's really the way it's supposed to work, right?
Yeah.
If you're picking a game to win Game of the Year that you wouldn't pick for best narrative, for best animation, for best sound design, then why are you picking it for Game of the Year?
That's a great point. I'm not exactly sure why you would do that. But I guess it's the argument where it's better than the sum of its parts. But if you picked other games' parts to be the best, why can't they be? it's always a great conversation to have. I love this time of year, the end of the year. I feel like you can cut the gaming industry into two halves: the lead up to E3 in June, and then the lead up to the awards, where you play everything, and then you'll all argue about who wins Game of the Year. They're both fantastic discussions to have, and so you're in the Last of Us 2 boat. Can I sign you off on that?
Yeah, I would put money down on The Last of Us Part 2 winning. I really do. Naughty Dog is a critical darling. They rarely lose these kinds of awards. So
this radio station is called Fox PHL The Gambler, so you may have just made that. You may just have to do that. And I wanted to bring up the Game Awards because, as I mentioned before we started here, we're approaching a decade of having known each other, running into each other at the Video Game Awards when they were called that back in 2010. Walking the red carpets, trying to interview people, and in that little press tent, I guess, for lack of a better term, or press cubicle that they had us in, where the winners would come in and talk to us after they received their award. I think Skyrim debuted that year too at the Video Game Awards. Do you remember that? Do you remember the way it used to be versus what it is now?
Oh, yeah. I love red carpets. I started out in entertainment news, and I did a lot of carpets early in my on-camera career, and I live for red carpets. I think that the chaos of them is so much fun, and it's where I met one of my good friends, Ray Carcello.
Yeah, Ray. Shout out to Ray. Shout out to Ray.
I vividly remember that red carpet because I was taping with mini DV tapes because that was before SD cards. And I ran out of tape like a freaky noob on the carpet. I only brought like 2 tapes and I ran out of tape. And I remember going down the press line being like, does anybody have a spare DV tape that I can have? I'll get it back to you. I ran out of tape and there was like still people walking the carpet.
I vaguely remember that.
It was, and thankfully somebody had an extra one, and I was saved. My interviews were saved, but it was a wild time because it was just such a different era of video game content creation. And I'm so glad that Jeff has continued the spirit of the Game Awards after Spike TV shut down and the Video Game Awards, as we used to know them, went away, and he took up the mantle and honestly has made them into something far better than we ever got on Spike TV. And it honors the video game development community better than I think what we previously got, which was so entertainment focused. And he still does a carpet. Obviously there will be no carpet this year as the Game Awards are going all digital because of the pandemic, but I have been able to do the Game Awards backstage lounge. I hosted for Jeff doing the Winners Lounge with Facebook Gaming for a couple of years, and then I got to work the carpet last year with McDonald's and Chef Mike, which was really fun.
Chef Mike.
Yeah, he's great. And so it's been a really fun time, and I'm going to miss being there. I'm going to miss seeing everybody in the lobby. I'm going to miss running out to the lobby and doing tequila shots with people.
I hear the JW afterward, just like E3 is.
Oh, yes, exactly. The hotel that's right next to the Microsoft Theater where the awards are held. It's a fun time for us all to get together in the industry and celebrate an amazing year of video games, and we're not going to be able to do that this year, and that's pretty sad.
Yeah, the VGAs where we met each other is actually the only one I've ever been to. They're trying to get back one of these years, but
oh my gosh, you have to get out to LA for the awards. They're so much fun.
I know, but
last year Steimer and I ran down to the stage to dance for Green Day. You remember Green Day?
I do remember Green
Day.
Day.
She was like, if they let us like mosh pit, we have to go.
We're going. Yeah.
And she was like, get up. She's like, we're going down there. And we were like 2 of the first people to run down to the front. We just started dancing in front of the stage. We were
Excellent.
Like, who cares? Let's do it.
1995 all over again. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, Andrea, I will let you go on that. I am so, like I said, honored that you joined me here today for this 25th episode of Cheesesteaks and Controllers. You are, as I said before, the pinnacle. You are the bar that has been set
You're too kind.
in this industry. And anyone who wants to get into content creation or hosting or whatever, need look no further for an example than Andrea Rene. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great week. There she is, folks. Andrea Rene of What's Good Games joining me here on Cheesesteaks and Controllers. You can find her content at what'sgoodgames.com. That is the gateway to all of her podcasts, all of her the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/what'sgoodgames. They will be co-streaming the Game Awards next week at 6 o'clock local time, 3 o'clock Pacific on that channel. So you can join Andrea and Brittany and maybe Christine. She didn't say who all would be there, but the What's Good team will be co-streaming the Game Awards 2020 next week, starting at 6 o'clock local time. Also, the What's Good Games podcast is hosted on iHeartRadio. So, if you when you're done listening to this, when it goes live at 9 a.m. Eastern Time on a Friday, check out What's Good Games on a Friday, because that's when their episodes all go live, and give them all the support that you can, because they absolutely deserve it. Andrea and her team do great work. And now we move on to the final segment of the day, and that is the speed run. Let's do it. All right, for tonight's speed run, I noticed this week there was a little bit of a chill in the air. Things were starting to get a little cold in the Philadelphia area. So I thought I'd do something fun for the end of the show tonight for our silver anniversary, our silver cheesesteak. Let's talk about snow and ice levels in video games. Snow levels are very prevalent in video games, mostly in adventure games and sometimes a fighting game or two. I found an article in my research that listed 160 games that had snow levels in them. So if you play video games or you ever have played video games in your life, chances are you've run into a snow level. So I just wanted to go through a couple of my favorites. I have 5 of my favorites with a couple of honorable mentions right before the first one, right before the last one. And I just wanted to go through and talk about some of the best snow levels ever in video games. And the first one is from one of my all-time favorite video games, a game that I wish I could play right now as soon as I was done recording this show, and that is GoldenEye 64's Severnaya. Now, this was a giant snowy plateau, a snowy plain with bunkers. You had to reach the bunker at the end of the stage in order to proceed through the game. This stage was so nice, you went there twice. The first time was during the day, the second time was at night. It was just as vast, just as filled with enemies, just as easy to explore and find all the little hidden areas, complete all your tasks as 007 before getting to the end of the level. In the first one, you had to find the bunker. In the second one, you had to jump into the silo. At nighttime, you had to jump into the silo. Just one of the coolest levels in that game. It's wide open nature, a lot different than the other stages in the game. So that is one of my favorites. Another one is from the PlayStation era. That is from a game called Gex 3, Deep Cover Gecko. If you remember Gex, he was a smart-mouth lizard voiced by Dana Gould, who was obsessed with television, and all the levels in his games were based on TV. And the one I'm talking about here was called Holiday Broadcasting. This was a warped Christmas special sort of world where you had to fight Christmas elves and save your friend from being frozen in ice, and an evil Santa Claus waited for you at the very end of it. It's just a weird, warped take on not only a snow level, but on the holidays themselves. The music, which you're hearing right now, was a little bit creepy. It was just interesting, very 90s, very late 90s humor sort of take on the Christmas season. In fact, it was such a trend. It was such it set the bar for the rest of the game, being the first level in the game. After that, you went to, there was a secret agent world, there was a western world, there was a King Tut world, and stuff like that. But the holiday broadcasting was the very first stage in Gex 3, and it really set the tone for the rest of it. Next up, I'm going to really retro here. Let's go back to the Super Nintendo and talk about Vanilla Lake in Super Mario Kart. The original Super Mario Kart, to me, is still one of my favorite racing games of all time, even though it's simplistic, even though it has not aged well compared to the other Mario Kart games. Mario Kart 8, if you haven't played it, is absolutely fantastic. But something about Vanilla Lake, specifically the version of Vanilla Lake where it's just one giant pool of water and you have to drive around it. I just love it. I love those stages. I love driving through them. I love racing on them. I love the music. I love the scenario. I just love that game, and I love everything about it. And I love Vanilla Lake. I'm a big fan of everything there is to do with Vanilla Lake, and every time I think of a snow level in a video game, I think of that. I do think of my days racing around that lake as fast as I possibly could, trying not to fall in it, which I would do a lot. I would fall in there a lot. The fourth one I have for you here is Freeze Easy Peak from Banjo-Kazooie, one of the many Nintendo 64 mountain levels from the platform at the time. Cool Mountain from Super Mario 64 also comes to mind, but Freeze Easy Peak takes it for me because you had the races with the polar bears, you had the giant statue, the giant snowmen that you could climb looking for the jiggies, the jigsaw puzzle pieces. That polar bear in particular, I'm a big fan of because he just shouts "Wah-hey!" every time he jumps, and it really brings a smile to my face thinking about that old stage. Freeze Easy Peak was a great time. One of the best stages in what was a tremendous game, Banjo-Kazooie on the 64. If you have an Xbox One and you have not played it yet, it is available on there as part of Rare Replay, so you can check out that old game. I highly recommend it, and Freeze Easy Peak will be an absolute delight when you get there. Make sure you say, "Wah-hey!" every time the polar bear does too. Before I get to my last one, I would like to go through a couple of honorable mentions that didn't quite make my list here. Mount Wario from Mario Kart 8 is a big one. One of the best Mario Kart levels ever made, with the mixture of size and obstacles and scenery. It's a very good one. Frosty Village from Diddy Kong Racing is another great snow racing game. Diddy Kong Racing, a very criminally underrated racing game, one that I would hope would come back at some point in the near future. And then Thamir's Corpse, or the Stone Mason from God of War in 2018, when Kratos and Atreus have to get the chisel, or the piece of the chisel, from the Stone Mason's tools. But unfortunately that is buried in a sheet of ice that was caused by the dying breath of Thamir the Giant, the Stone Mason. So you have to use his body as a dungeon and go through his frozen body to get to where you have to get to. It's one of the more unique parts of God of War, which is one of my favorite games of the last generation. Easily the best game of 2018, in my opinion. I know Red Dead 2 came out then as well. Fight me. But yeah, the using a giant's corpse as a stage is not something I will soon forget from God of War. And I'm very much looking forward to Ragnarok in 2021, when a brand new full game of snow, it seems, will descend on the PlayStation 5. Let's just hope I can get one by then. That would be helpful. We will see about that. But my favorite snow level of all time, the best one, and the one that I keep going back to whenever I think of the snowy, icy levels of yore, is the mountain from Journey. Now, if you don't remember Journey came out in 2012 for the PlayStation 3 and has since come out on other formats, and it is a simple game, as simple as they get. You play as a little hooded person, black face, hood, little eyes, really non-distinct little person, and you travel through this desert, and then there's an underground area. You travel through this vast world with different sorts of dangers and obstacles and all this other stuff. Fantastic, beautiful scenery, all in pursuit of getting to the top of this mountain. And you keep traversing and solving all these puzzles. If you meet other travelers along the way, you can speak to them and they can speak to you, but you can only make little chirps. There's no text, there's no voice. It's just chirps to communicate with your fellow players, the most rudimentary communication that there is. And if you take someone with you on the journey and you play with them throughout the entire time, that's something you can do, or you can just say hello as you pass throughout your journey. Kind of sounds familiar, right? Like life itself. And then towards the end, you go through this really snowy portion with big winds and massive snow drifts, and eventually you just find yourself walking in a blinding snowstorm, just walking forward, until eventually the traveler falls over, exhausted, can't go any further, and then the storm swirls around them and shoots them into the sky, and they start glowing. And there's all these things that are happening. There's a light at the end of this storm, and you go through the light, and suddenly the top of the mountain appears in front of you, and you're soaring through the sky, and this music is playing. Austin Wintory was out of his mind when he was making this soundtrack. It's just a beautiful scene as you're drifting through the rest of this mountain, and the sun is shining. It's a wonderful, it's really, really wonderful, and I could never do it justice trying to describe it to you now. If you have the ability to play Journey, I highly suggest that you do so. PS3, PS4, and I want to say PC, but I could be wrong about that. It's a must play, and I guarantee that when you do that, you will listen to the soundtrack for the rest of your life. The entire soundtrack is great. The song that accompanies getting to the top of the mountain, Apotheosis, is one of the greatest video game tracks I've ever heard. So I definitely recommend playing Journey if you have not already. And that's it. Those are the snow and ice levels in video games. I know I missed some. I can think of obscure ones like Glacius' stage from the Killer Instinct games. There are a couple of more mainstream ones like the Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 snow stage. So if you have a favorite snow stage, leave me a comment on my Twitter at BigManFanelli of what your favorite snow or icy stage is. Would love to hear more. I would love to get some feedback on my list here. And with that is the end of the Silver Cheesesteak. Episode 25 of Cheesesteaks and Controllers is done. It has been a journey these 25 weeks, bringing you all of these episodes. I hope you enjoy my content. I hope it's relevant to you. I hope it teaches you something. I hope you're entertained, first and foremost. If you're listening to the end of these podcasts every week and you're not entertained, then that says more about you than it does me, although I do very much appreciate it. If you are entertained, though, I thank you for your support. I thank you for continuing to listen. And I hope that there are many, many more episodes in the future where I can continue to do what I love and have you listen to it as they come out. Next week, we'll be taping this as the Game Awards are happening, so you'll get some live reaction from me. And then I don't know what else is happening next week, so we will talk about that when the time comes. But for now, this has been episode 25 of the Cheesesteaks and Controllers podcast. My name is Jason Fanelli. I am the Esports and Gaming Insider for Fox PHL The Gambler, 102.5 FM, 1480 AM, and iHeartRadio Philadelphia. Next up, as always, is the Liberty Line podcast. And on Tuesday, the Rodney McLeod Show, live from Chickies and Beats in South Philadelphia. Make sure you listen to it. Thank you all once again for listening. Have a great week, and we will talk again next time. See you later.